Greece announces the creation of a new camp for asylum seekers. New clashes erupt between Saudi forces and Houthi rebels in Yemen. And a sexual abuse scandal fuels protests in Colombia. Hello and welcome to TeleSUR. I'm Doris Polo in Quito, and this is from the south. We begin with news that a new camp for migrants has been set up in the Greek island of Lesbos after a fire destroyed the previous largest migrant camp in Europe. Over 11,000 people, including 4,000 children, had been living in the notoriously overcrowded and unsanitary Moira camp before it burned down last week. Saturday saw hundreds of asylum seekers rise up and demand their freedom. But this was followed by security forces heavily repressing the protests. Authorities say that the migrants will all be transferred to the new camp within a week. Meanwhile, only a few people remain at the Moira camp. While some asylum seekers have already moved to the new camp, most others are being forced to sleep rough until their transfer. On Saturday afternoon, hesitant queues formed at the new camp of Karatep, with some migrants agreeing to enter to secure shelter and food. Police said around 200 migrants had checked in, while dozens, mostly families, were waiting outside for hygiene and safety checks.
Nothing, just this 2-3 family, maybe single man here, Syria people. 4 family is Afghanistan. All people left for Karataba. Moria finished, don't have anything people here.
The Saudi-led military coalition has attacked barracks and military positions belonging to Houthi rebels in the outskirts of Yemen's capital, Sana'a. The attacks come a few days after the Houthis claimed that they had attacked an important target in the Saudi capital, Riyadh. The fighting between the two sides has killed more than 100,000 people and displaced millions others. The conflict began in 2014 when the Houthis took over the Yemeni capital Sana'a and most other cities after ousting the Saudi-backed government of Abd Rabbu Mansur Hadi. The US-backed coalition led by Saudi Arabia has been trying to restore Hadi back to power ever since. While diesel stations in the Libyan city of Benghazi have closed down as the country undergoes a severe fuel crisis. Long queues of vehicles can be seen outside fueling stations waiting to obtain diesel amid a fuel crisis in oil-rich Libya. Distributors have attributed the shortage to the delay of marine tankers that bring fuel into the country. The delays have also forced refineries to suspend operations.
We as ordinary citizens are hurt by the diesel crisis, badly hurt, and now the diesel dealers are controlling the situation, filling containers, cans and everything with diesel. And they are selling those containers. Someone called me and told me that he was ready to buy a diesel container for 500 or 600 Libyan dinars. He can buy it with no problem, but others cannot.
Mauritius has witnessed the largest protest rally in 40 years as citizens took to the streets to demonstrate against the government's handling of a recent oil spill. About 25,000 people marched in the city of Mahibourg for the second time in a month, calling for the resignation of Prime Minister Pravind Jugnauth and his government. The demonstrators blamed the government for mishandling the oil spill caused by a 1,000-ton Japanese fuel tank which was shipwrecked off the island's coast back in July and spilled its contents. The spill has inflicted untold damage on the Indian Ocean archipelago, which depends on its fabled coastline for fishing and ecotourism. Uganda has reached an agreement with the French oil company Total that will see the construction of a crude oil pipeline to neighboring Tanzania. Under the agreement, a 900-mile East African crude oil pipeline is set to be constructed at a cost of $3.5 billion. Uganda discovered crude oil reserves 14 years ago, but commercial production has been delayed due to a lack of infrastructure.
I want to assure Ugandans that this is a deliberate step by us. After careful study, there were some issues about tax here, tax this one, tax. But having gone through every item, our strategy is that we start now.
Staying in Africa, Mali's military junta has pledged to establish an 18-month transition government that will lead the country to civilian rule after last month's coup. The junta, opposition parties and civil society organizations have been meeting since Thursday to chart the way forward for the nation. But the most contentious issue remains whether the transition government will be headed by a civilian or soldier.
We make a commitment before you to spare no effort in the implementation of all these resolutions in the exclusive interest of the Malian people. We request and hope for the understanding, support, and assistance of the international community in this diligent and correct implementation of the Transition Charter and Roadmap.
Ivory Coast's main opposition Democratic Party of Côte d'Ivoire has nominated Henry Konan Bédié as its candidate for the upcoming presidential elections. The party formalized Bédié's candidacy during a rally held in the capital, Yamoussoukro. The election, slated for October 31st, will see the incumbent Alassane Ouattara, who will be seeking a third term in office, face off against former President Laurent Gbagbo and former rebel leader Guillaume Soro. The Zimbabwean ruling party ZANU-PF has accused the opposition Movement for Democratic Alliance of training insurgents in Eastern Europe. ZANU-PF's acting secretary for information and publicity, Patrick Chinamasa, claimed that the country's largest opposition party is sending its youths for militant training in Serbia and Moldova. He further alleged that the MDC alliance is planning to destabilize the country through violent protests and acts of sabotage.
That the MDC has been sending to Serbia and Moldova renegades who are being trained to prepare Molotov cocktails to come and cause mayhem and violence in our country. I wanted to say to BT and Chamisa, don't play with fire like little children.
The city of Cape Town in South Africa has been able to cope with the effects of a lengthy drought season thanks to a dam that, for the first time in years, is at capacity. The Berg River Dam, one of the nation's main water sources, is just one of a number of dams that are holding water at well over 95% of their capacity. This is the first time that the city's dams have been filled to capacity since 2014, and according to experts, this is thanks to improved water management by the city. But this might not be the case for much longer, as seasonal changes will bring warmer weather and less rainfall. For their part, city officials are urging all residents to maintain the water-wise approach, which has helped the city overcome the drought so far.
Dams are full, and it is a sight that we're all ecstatic about because we haven't seen this since about 2014, when we had all of those dams almost full. They're about 95%. Some of them are full, and they obviously will vary. But it is very amazing change, given the fact that we were right at this day zero and we're concerned in 2018, round about January, whether we'd even make it through till the next winter rain. So it's an amazing turnaround.
We'll take a short break now. We have more stories coming up, so don't go away. Welcome back. Protests against police brutality in Colombia continued for a fourth day straight on Saturday. The protest was sparked by the alleged sexual abuse of 3 women in a police station in Bogota. Widespread protests began last week after a video released on social media showed a man being tortured by police hours before he died in custody. Since the mobilizations began, at least 13 people have been killed and more than 400 were wounded by police.
Here today, the feminist movement is mainly gathered rejecting these actions, because we are tired of being repressed by a military force, a violent, repressive force with shields, with firearms, with tanks.
We came here because the police centers and the police force are torture entities financed by the state, of which the victims are women, non-binary people, trans people, black people, people who live on the streets.
The Chilean government has extended the state of exception for a second time by 90 days. The decree will continue to restrict a number of citizen rights, including the right to hold gatherings. It also comes less than a day after police heavily repressed mobilizations commemorating the 1973 military coup. According to authorities, the extension hopes to protect citizens from the COVID-19 pandemic. Staying in Latin America, a large number of industrial projects in Bolivia have come to a complete halt since last November's coup against President Evo Morales. We have more details in this report.
The de facto Minister of Development Planning confirmed in a report to the lower house the stop of operations at an urea and fertilizer plant which had international contracts.
Due to the pandemic and the fall in oil prices, the price of urea fell internationally, and unfortunately, this plant used to produce most of the exports. What was left over is being sold in the local market.
The movement towards Socialism Party has warned that these industrial endeavors were paralyzed as part of a strategy to undermine the achievements made by the previous government.
We are seeing the urea, ammonia, and lithium industrial projects come to a complete halt. Energy and petrochemical projects have been stopped. We had a project ready to sell energy within our borders. It was all stopped. According to the de facto minister, these projects were held as they are not considered to be profitable.
The de facto government issued a decree 2 months ago saying that all state companies that are not profitable must be reformed.
We have reviewed Supreme Decree 4262, in particular Article 100, which states that institutions that do not generate profits will be reformed. In other words, they will be privatized.
Since November, these companies suspended all production and reportedly only have enough personnel on hand for the maintenance of the facilities.
We have come to the conclusion that losses from this shutdown reached $250 million. The country was already exporting urea and ammonia, and the lithium plants in the Uyuni salt flats were already working. So we have official figures that tell us how much was lost.
These industrial projects saw investments of hundreds of millions of dollars as part of a development plan to diversify Bolivia's sources of income, expanding from mining and natural gas exports.
The world's largest tropical wetland area located in Brazil's Pantanal region is being consumed by massive forest fires. Authorities have been unable to contain the fires, which have been spreading for weeks and have already consumed tens of thousands of acres. The fires reportedly started at the hands of local ranchers and farmers who for years have been clearing land for agriculture, cattle farming and logging. On top of this, drought conditions have worsened the situation. Experts agree that this year's wildfires in the Amazon could set a new record for destruction in one of the most biodiverse areas in the world. For more, let's go to our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Brian Mayer.
Last year, I traveled up to Rondônia during the worst fire crisis in over a decade to give coverage for TeleSUR. And this year, although all of the media is looking at California right now, the fires underway in the Amazon region, in Brazil, and in the Pantanal wetlands region are just as bad, if not worse, than they were last year. There's over 20,000 different individual fires burning in the state of Mato Grosso right now, according to the Brazilian Space Agency. And it's important to know that these fires are all man-made. There's no such thing as natural forest fires in the Amazon biome. Now, when Bolsonaro was elected, he immediately started giving out messages to his friends and supporters in the lager, the soy, and the beef industries that he was not going to enforce environmental regulations in the Amazon region. And what we see now is continued impunity as loggers and ranchers start fires on indigenous reservations like the Xingu, which is burning out of control right now, and in national parks, so they can enter afterwards and clear the remains for soy and beef production.
Brand Mayor bringing us that report. An alliance of social movements and associations of Brazilians living abroad has launched an initiative to raise funds to help mitigate the negative impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on marginalized communities. The organizations from the Brazilian diaspora in the US, Canada, and Switzerland have set a target of $38,000, which they hope to distribute to indigenous, Afro-Brazilian, and urban low-income communities. These communities, which have already been constantly marginalized by the far-right government, have been disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Moving on, feminist activists in Mexico protested against their violent eviction from the Human Rights Commission building by setting part of it on fire. The group of about 20 women were occupying the offices to protest the lack of care provided to cases of gender violence and forced disappearances. For their part, an official from the Human Rights Commission said the occupation was inadmissible and that they were going to investigate it. On Friday, the Venezuelan president announced the capture of a U.S. citizen in the state of Falcón, who was allegedly spying and gathering information on state oil facilities.
El día de ayer en el estado Falcón.
In the state of Falcón, a U.S. spy was caught gathering intel on the Amoay and Cardón refineries. We found all the proof, all videos and photos.
Este espía es
The spy was a Marine who used to work in CIA bases in Iraq. He was found with heavy weaponry, specialized weapons. He was carrying large amounts of cash, as well as other supplies that are in the hands of the public ministry.
Authorities in Bermuda have advised citizens to take precautionary measures ahead of the arrival of tropical storm Paulette. On Saturday, the Meteorological Service announced a hurricane watch for the Gulf of Mexico, as Paulette is expected to turn into a hurricane by Monday morning. Trinidad and Tobago will not reopen its borders anytime soon, and all restrictions implemented to stem the spread of COVID-19 will remain in place until October 11th. That's according to Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. To date, the country has recorded 3,019 cases of the novel coronavirus and 53 deaths.
All the arrangements remain in place. I know we are tempted to want to go to the beaches and the rivers. Let us hold on a bit. And today is the 12th so we will maintain this posture for another month. And by the 28th, we will review. But by the 28th, we will be halfway there. It's another 14-day period. And we will do another review then, hopefully, all things being equal, all disciplines and protocols being observed. By the 28th, we will have a view which will give us what the month of September look like. And we can compare September with August. And we will then have the other 14-day period going into October. If any adjustments can be made then, we would consider them, but as of now, we are not minded to make any adjustments to what we are doing.
With that, we're taking one last break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Pressure is mounting on embattled Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as citizens continue calling for his resignation. On Saturday, thousands of Israelis rallied once again outside Netanyahu's official residence in Jerusalem, demanding that the longtime Prime Minister steps down. Netanyahu faces trial for corruption and has been criticized for mishandling the COVID-19 pandemic. Speaking of protests, Yellow Vest protesters resumed mobilizations in France against the government of Emmanuel Macron. But the demonstrators were met with repression as police fired tear gas at the citizens. The Yellow Vest social movement started back in 2018, taking to the streets every weekend for more than a year straight. They call for widespread political and economic reforms as they say the government prioritizes corporations and the rich over everyday families.
I have been on the streets since 19 November 2018 for the future of our children, for the social gains we are losing with this government and all the governments before. I've been campaigning with the Yellow Vest since the beginning because we no longer have freedom. We no longer have purchasing power, and we are all disgusted.
Health workers in the United Kingdom took to the streets to demand a pay raise. Hundreds of nurses and other healthcare workers marched through central London, calling for a 15% wage increase. The workers also held a 2-minute moment of silence to remember their 640 colleagues who died from COVID-19. The National Health Service has threatened more strikes if the British government fails to resolve the issue.
Working that hard when you're already exhausted from fighting a pandemic is an outrage. We should be paid properly. How can we be expected to work through a second wave when we're physically and emotionally exhausted, and on top of that we're worrying about paying our bills?
United Kingdom overseas territories are set to be grossly affected by the impact of Brexit, officials have warned. Speaking during the British Virgin Islands Innovation Virtual Summit, Overseas UK expressed concern that Brexit will cause devastating effects on their territories. They predicted that they are going to suffer economically as Britain will not give them the financial support they were receiving from the EU.
A lot stands to be lost, and the big questions are whether the UK will fill the gap and what the post-Brexit relationship between the UK and the overseas territories will be. The EU has been a vital source of development assistance, particularly for those overseas territories not eligible for aid elsewhere. EU funds are supporting the sustainable development of these islands in key areas such as climate change, biodiversity, and sustainable energy. Future rounds of these funds will not be available to the overseas territories. The UK has also not committed to replacing these funds after existing projects and programs end.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, I am Doris Polo. Thanks for watching.